Hi, and welcome back to the Shane Plays Out of the Abyss Notes series as I take my intrepid party of adventurers through the Underdark, the 5th edition Out of the Abyss Underdark adventure, Out of the Abyss, at my friendly local game store each week. So this is where I recap each session, talk about, thoughts as a dungeon master and maybe questions about the players and stuff like that. And in fact, this video is going to have several opportunities for people who are watching to provide input. Which I think will be interesting and fun. So, it just as a refresher, Out of the Abyss is a pretty big campaign. Goes from level 1 to 15, and it involves not only the dangers of the Underdark, but madness spreading through the Underdark because the demon lords have entered the prime material plane. So it's this overarching sort of tyranny of demons D&D storyline that touched on, the tabletop, the video games, the books, all that stuff. So anyway, this week I have a few things, notes, and I will get into what actually happened in the session. It was mainly a combat, and I'll talk about that a little bit before we wrap. Uh, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I did as a DM. I was recently, I interviewed Russ Morrissey from Ian World on my radio show, and we were talking about Wine, his new What's Old is New role playing system that has sci fi and high fantasy and 80s action settings. There's three main settings for the overall game system. And one of the things I asked him, I said, what's like a mechanic that you put in that you think other games lack? And he said, I it boggles me or whatever when I'd been in a campaign with somebody for a long time and they suddenly mention they've got a 17 charisma, and he's like, how did I not know that? So he's got a mechanic in there that people can introduce their characters in a short summary and gets the very obvious qualities out there so people know about that stuff. So what I did at the beginning of this session, I said, hey, I just want to go around the table. And a lot of these people have played together for, you know, months, over a year. Now, these characters, I can't even remember when we started. It's probably been 6, 7, 8 months since we started Out of the Abyss. And a lot of these characters and players have been there since the beginning. And I just wanted to make sure that everybody had a good understanding of the high points of the character stuff. That if you were in the if in the fictional game, if you were one of those characters traveling with this other character, that you would know. It's just obvious after traveling with them for a while. So I gave each character or each player a chance to summarize highlights of their character, things that would be obvious or that maybe people would learn as they travel with you and that sort of thing, so they'd have a better sense of each character. And so we went around and did that. And the way I presented it was like just the stuff that is really obvious. You don't have to go super in depth if you don't want to, uh, but that's really obvious. And I kind of sprang this on my players. I'm pretty spontaneous that way. It went really well, but I think if somebody else was going to introduce this, they might say, "Hey, next session at the beginning of the session, think of a quick paragraph that summarizes your character, the high points, the unmistakable aspects of your character that any character traveling with your character. Sorry if you saw that glare. I just shut something down that was glaring on the side of my face. Um, and think about it for next session. But I just kind of sprang it on them, which maybe that was better, maybe it wasn't. Maybe we got more spontaneous stuff. I don't know. And we kind of went around the table. I think we had 7 people the other night. Maybe I think it was 7, and just let everybody kind of a really high attribute that my character has is this, or a very low attribute, or this is my character's motivation, or this is a physical characteristic, or this is a personality trait that exhibits constantly for each character. Now, the first player, and it wasn't their fault, they were the guinea pig, uh, really went into an in-depth backstory kind of thing. And there's nothing, it was interesting, and I'm glad that they had the opportunity to share that. But for time-wise, uh, unless you want to take up an entire session doing this, I wouldn't recommend that. Um, so they went into like backstory and this and that and motive, all this stuff. It was really interesting. Uh, but that wasn't my particular focus with this question. I was just like, summarize, almost like how um, Monte Cook Games in their Numenera system, their cipher system, will say, I am a adjective noun that verbs. So I am a, nimble, and this isn't exactly how Numenera would do it, but they would say, I'm a nimble rogue who uh, likes to psychologically analyze people, something like that. Or I'm a proud warrior that never retreats. Something like that. Now an adjective, noun, that verbs. Now it doesn't have to be that tight for the point or purposes of this exercise that I did with my group. I wanted to go a little bit deeper than that, but the point is kind of a summary. Like if you spend any time with this character, what's some takeaways that are absolutely, um, you know, unmistakable that you're going to get from this character. So that way you have a better sense of your different party members. And so we went around, like I learned that, and I'm sure that the character or the player introduced this character that way. And this wasn't the most amazing thing that was shared, but it's just something that stands out. They're a tiefling, and their tail's been cut off. And their tail being cut off is part of why they're no longer with the group they were with before, and how they met this group in the Underdark. So I'm sure that was mentioned to me when the character was, but it didn't stick. So going around the table, that kind of thing. I learned about, uh, reinforced the two of the players are sisters. Um, reinforced all this different stuff. Each character had something, or each player had something interesting to share about their character that brought more depth. And more depth brings more engagement, brings more enjoyment from the role playing. So I thought it was fun. Now it did take a little while. It took a good bit of the session doing that, and I just kind of sprang it on them. So I'm not saying do it that way, but if you think that's an interesting idea, I would encourage you to do it because I think we all had fun. And I gave every player, they didn't know they were going to get this when we were done. I said, okay, give each of yourselves, you get 100 experience points for doing that. And I think everybody had a pretty good time. And there was, I saw afterwards some discussion between the players. Oh yeah, yeah, really, and so I think that kind of bonded the party a little bit more. Um, and maybe it'll lead to more interesting role playing, ROE playing, not just ROLL playing. And we don't, I mean, my group doesn't just ROLL play by any means. So, but maybe this will lead to even better and more engaging role playing than we already have, which is good. Um, and by good, I mean it's already at a good level. Um, so we did that, and as part of that, one of the questions that came out, and my player actually said, "Hey, I know you do that video thing. Why don't you ask your viewers this?" So, I'd like to get your take on this. Now, as you may or may not know, our rogue, um, our plays the player who plays the rogue plays a blind rogue, like visibly blind, and we've had a lot of interesting role playing and a lot of fun with that. Um, and it's gotten to the point now through feats and this and that and the other, he's kind of minimized the impact of that, but it still affects his character, very much. And he said so, and they're on fourth level. They're on the verge of fifth level. We were talking about XP the other night, and I doled out XP. They're about 1,000 points away from fifth level. And he said, so what are we going to do about Uncanny Dodge? He said, because here's the rogue thing for Uncanny Dodge. Starting at fifth level, when an attacker that you can see hits you with an attack, you can use your reaction to have the attack's damage against you. Okay? An attacker that you can see. He can't see the attacker. So, do we alter it? If you could somehow perceive this, or do I just say, well, I'm going to give you a different feat, or you could choose from this list of feats, or what? Now, he's a roguish, what's the word? Arcane trickster. So he's got some magic. He can summon familiars now, and he's starting to look through the eyes of his familiar. So maybe we could combine those two. I don't know. If you were a DM and it came, you had a player that was playing a blind rogue, physically blind rogue, um, that came to 5th level and should get that uncanny dodge uh, class attribute, class trait. How would you handle that? So I'm leaning towards coming up with a list of feats that he can choose from, or letting him just take a feat and go. Take a feat like you were, 4th level and you were going to take a feat or whatever. It was, I think it's every 4 levels or something like that in the optional feats, uh, rule. So I don't know. Oh, or do we say, yeah, you get that trait, but we have to come up under what circumstances you see an enemy trying to attack you. So I welcome your thoughts on that, and I always welcome your thoughts and comments on of any of the videos. One of the things I really enjoy about doing this series is that it really generates a lot of comments and feedback. So I always welcome that, as I'm doing these. So anyway, but yeah, I think this is the first time I've had somebody say specifically ask the video, the YouTube viewers what they would do. So the floor is open, and I look forward to your comments and thoughts and questions if you have any. So we came into uh, I'll get into actually what happened in the session, and because of I think we were doing XP and we were doing we did this around the table thing and other discussion. It was the actual part of the session where we played, even though all of its play was a little shorter than normal. So it was basically just combat. Um, at the end of last session, they had gone to the Trader's Grotto in Blingdenstone, and it says in the book the first time you go there unescorted, an alarm rings and 2 gelatinous cubes attack, because there's like this whole pudding king thing going on as one of the main side subplots or whatever of Blingdenstone. Um, and so there's kind of a walled off area, and some gelatinous cubes squeeze through that and attack the marketplace. Squeeze through that. Um, so that's right where we picked up. I read the description last time. I said gelatinous cubes are attacking. Shut the book and said see you next week. And so we, after all the other stuff we did, talking about, tell us a little bit more about your characters and this and that, we went straight into that, and we had an extended combat, or not extended combat, but it was a long combat sequence. And by the time we finished all that up, it was pretty much time to wrap. So what I did, because one of the things I'm trying to do to help these characters advance in XP, because they're only 4th level, they're kind of close to 5th, and they really need to be 7th level pretty soon, really by the time they finish Blingdenstone. Now, somebody did point out in the last video, in the comments, basically the way Out of the Abyss works is split into 2 parts, and there's a point where they leave the Underdark, and then about a month later in game time come back to Gauntlgrim and continue the second part of the adventure. The first part's focused on trying to escape the Underdark, and they're really close to that point. After they finish Blingdenstone, it's a really good time for them to leave and go Out of the Abyss, as the adventure's name, strangely enough. But they're shy of 5th level now, so I need to find 2 levels, hopefully in the next several sessions. So, but as somebody pointed out last video, it says, it didn't really say they have to be 7th level when they leave. They just need to be 7th level when they come back. And that's a good point. I suppose I could milestone them, which I prefer not to do, but I'll have to. I will if I have to. Or, maybe we could run an adventure after they get out, that will allow them to, get some XP. That, and it would explain what happened in that month or so, before they come back down. And I can fudge that time. I mean, it doesn't have to be a month. I think that's just kind of what the book suggests, if I remember right. So, but because of that, we average 7 or 8 players. So the encounters as designed in the book are probably for 4 to 6 players, right? And so the amount of XP they've been getting hasn't been as much per character as it could be. So I'm trying to be better about, ramping up the encounters and maybe making the creatures a little tougher and giving a little bit more XP award per creature, that sort of thing. So I dropped another gelatinous cube into the mix. So they fought 3 gelatinous cubes. I really probably could have put 4, because it took them a while to defeat the gelatinous cubes, but nobody really came in danger of dying. Not players anyway. Now an NPC was taking some damage. Um, and that NPC, there's this guard, and it gives the statistics. I think you give him veteran stats out of the monster manual and gnomish racial abilities, but he gets engulfed like right at the beginning of the encounter. You see this gnome guard like, and then all of a sudden he raises in the air, and then you realize there's a gelatinous cube around him, and he's getting hit by the acid. So that gnome was taking damage, and that poor guy got engulfed twice. So one of the things that the characters did, because they're, and we also talked, we went around when I was talking after everybody introduced themselves and and talked about their character. I went back around and said, okay, what's everybody's alignment? Because I, as a DM, I like the alignment system. I have no problem in a fantasy world with alignment actually being a force. It's not just a moral concept. It's not just a philosophy. It's part of the makeup of the world. You actually align to one of these moral dimensions. And there's game bonuses or negatives or repercussions or whatever based on alignment. Um, I've always thought that was a very cool. I'm trying to get rid of some more of this stuff glaring on my face. I've always thought that was a really cool part of D&D. Now some people hate it. They're like, let me play who I want to be, and that's fine. That's totally cool. But I like alignment because in a fantasy world that's made up of all these energies and deities and this and that and the other, um, alignment is just more than this philosophical concept. It's actually almost like an energy or a force or something like that that can attune you to different things. And I have no problem, again, in a fantasy world, like the concept of orcs being evil. That's just it. They're evil. They're not struggling with their evil nature. They're evil. Even little baby orc is evil. I don't have a problem with that in a fantasy setting. Because, part of role playing, I want to get away from the real world. I want to get away from the grays of the real world, right? The gray morality. Some stuff's good, some stuff's bad, some stuff's neutral. I'm okay with that. Now, having said all that, not everybody is, and if you want to jettison alignment from your D&D and whatever, that's fine. But I went back around and I said, okay, everybody, what's your alignment? And it was mostly good alignments with a couple of neutrals thrown in. So I pointed out, I said, your party as a whole leans good, and they were like, yeah, they got that, and they talked about that a little bit. Now, the closest thing we have to an evil character is a chaotic neutral. We do have one chaotic neutral character, and the player that plays that character, she has done in my opinion, a good job playing chaotic neutral. So, but anyway, so I went back around and reminded everybody their alignment. And I'm one of those DMs every now and then. If somebody takes an action, then I'm like, I think about it. I say, okay, now what is your alignment? And they'll tell me, and I'm like, okay, and I just make a mental note of it. Because if people start, I've always been one of those DMs. I like the idea if you start playing away from your alignment that you've declared, that's what your alignment is, you'll start suffering penalties until you either A, play like your alignment again, or change your official alignment more like your play style. Now, I haven't had to do that in a long time, but I do occasionally say, now, what's your alignment? And people then like, so I'll make a note of it or whatever. But again, this comes back to the concept that I see alignment in D&D as an actual spectrum of an actual, it's a law in the fantasy world like gravity is. It's just there. So, but again, if you don't like that style of play, you don't have to. But alignment's always fascinated me from D&D from the very beginning, and I think it's cool they put it in there. So anyway, moving on. I didn't even mean to talk about that. So we had the gelatinous cube combat, and the reason I was talking about the alignment is one of the things that the characters did right off the bat was they tried to save the veteran deep gnome guard that had gotten absorbed by the gelatinous cube. And that will be to their benefit because when you first enter Blingdenstone, the the attitude of the deep gnomes towards you is hostile. Now that doesn't mean that they try to attack you, but there's this social interaction chart in the DM's Guild that goes from hostile to indifferent to friendly. And before the gnomes will help you get out of the Underdark, give you maps and stuff, you have to get to friendly. So there's certain things that you can do, and it talks about it in the chapter for Blingdenstone. At certain points, things you do can allow you to take a group skill check or a group check on align or not on alignment, but to try to improve your social standing with the gnomes. And there's some stuff you can do that'll set it back a point. So that's one of the things you'll want to be aware of in Blingdenstone if you're playing, if you're going to do the social interaction by the book. I mean, you can just decide when the gnomes get friendly with them or hostile with them if you want. But as of right now, I'm kind of going by the book on how that works. And anyway, so they actually, like the monk rolled up and reached in and took damage and pulled the the guard out, and he's like, kind of got acid on him and everything. So anyway, there's quite a long combat, and basically what I did with the combat with these 3 gelatinous cubes was for the first several rounds, I had them continuing to move and attempt to engulf people. So in fact, that poor guard who got saved, a couple of rounds later, the gelatinous cube engulfed him again. Luckily for him, the cleric in the party dropped a heal on him and kept him alive. So, I think the second time he got pulled out, or maybe the first time, I can't remember, he got healed at one point, which helped him. Because, each subsequent round that you're in a gelatinous cube, you take an average of 21 points of damage. I think that's correct. So it's a lot. And if you get smacked with a pseudopod, I think you take what's the average of 3d6? 9 points of damage? I'm not sure. I'd have to go look that up. But they do a lot of damage, especially when they engulf you. So for the first several rounds, I just had them engulfing people. And then for the last few rounds of the combat, I had them shifting to slapping with their pseudopods. And there was some damage. There were some crits from the gelatinous cubes, and that poor gnome guard got engulfed twice, and I had another couple of characters get engulfed. And just pay attention to the gelatinous cube stats. They can, if they try to engulf you and you make your saving throw, then you can jump, move to certain squares. And if you fight your way out, I think it's a DC 12 dexterity saving throw, you can actually force your way out. And if you do, you can be in any square adjacent to the cube and that sort of thing. And a cube can move through any space that a character's in. I can't remember if it's a half movement or whatever, but they can engulf you. So the thing is, they can just move into your space, and they don't have to make an attack roll, and you have to make a dexterity save to get out of the way, or else you're engulfed. Is kind of how it works. So they defeated the cubes after a lot of fighting. In retrospect, I think I should have dropped in a third cube. And then they, because they tried to help the guard, they got a chance to do a group skill check on persuasion, and I think at a DC of 15, if I remember right from the book. And so a group skill check means everybody makes the skill check, and if half or more of the group makes it, then they succeed. Now, what I'm doing, because one of the characters is playing a drow, if you watched last video, I had a player drop a drow character on me all out of the blue right before they're going into Blingdenstone, which is not a good time to have a drow. And so I said, your character gets disadvantage every time you do one of these group skill checks. I think that's fair enough, because the gnomes really don't like the drow. And I think I determined, because there were 7 players, so I determined, I said they needed 4 or better. They needed 4 or more people to make the persuasion skill check at a DC of 15 or not, to ratchet it up 1 on the social interaction. And I think they did 3. I think 3 of them made it. So, I struggle with that, because when you round up in D&D, you're supposed to round down. So damage, if you do a damage of 7 and it gets halved, you do 3, not 4. But it seemed to me, for this group skill check, that it should be harder, not easier. So I said you have 7 players, you need 4 or more to make this group skill check, not 3, because 3 is less than half. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there's a rule directly saying I'm wrong in doing that, but that's how I went with it. If you have any thoughts on that or know of an exact way that it's supposed to happen, if you have an uneven amount of players in a group skill check, I'd love to hear your thoughts. But they did get XP for trying to save the gnome, and they did save him. I think they get 50 XP each by the book, and they get a chance to increase their social standing. Now, if they fail the group skill check, it does not bump their social standing down anymore. They just don't get to go up a level. So they're still at a hostel as a whole with the deep gnome community. Now, here's a couple of things that came up with this combat. And I actually tweeted this stuff to Chris Perkins and Mike Merles and Jeremy E. Crawford from D&D from Wizards of the Coast. Got answers on a couple of things, not everything. So one of the things that came up while people are floating in the cube, getting acid damage, well, the cleric, has a healing word, which is a ranged, and I think the bard does as well, which is a ranged healing spell. So they're like, can I heal somebody that's inside a gelatinous cube? And I'm sure that question has come up many times before in D&D, but I've never particularly thought about it. I have no doubt that there's answers out there. I was like, I don't know. Because you could, ranged is like, can you see them? And yeah, you can see them inside the gelatinous cube. So can I cast a ranged healing spell? Now that I've had time to think about it, I think my answer is just yes. But my answer at the time, because sometimes as a DM, you just got to come up with something on the spot. And so I said yes, but the gelatinous cube will get the same healing benefit. So that was how I ruled for that. Now, I tweeted that out to the Wizards of the Coast folks. They didn't answer that one. Probably because it's been answered a million times. They're like, I'm not going to answer that one again. And I haven't even gone and looked, to be honest. I'm sure it's out. I'm sure there's an answer out there. Now, another question that came up, because one of the people that got absorbed from the party engulfed was a dragonborn, and they said, can I use my breath weapon inside of a gelatinous cube? And I went, yes, and that was kind of my answer. And they didn't do it, but they asked. I tweeted that out, and Mike Merles, who's basically the main D&D dude, said yes, the Dragonborn can use a breath weapon inside a gelatinous cube. Now, the other thing that came up that was sort of a raging debate for a while was the ranger in our party wanted to use javelins and wanted to use their archery bonus, because there's like this archery thing where you get, I think, a +2 bonus or something like that to any ranged attack. Well, here's the thing. Javelins in 5th edition are considered melee weapons. And if you throw it, it's a ranged melee attack. I guess because they're just saying, it's this brute strength attack. Even though it's piercing, it's using the strength bonus. You're throwing it and the amount of strength that you put into it. So, that surprised me. I would assume that it had been a ranged weapon, but by the book, 5th edition is javelins are melee weapons. And evidently in other editions, it's changed here and there. But for 5th edition, it's ranged weapons. You don't get a dex bonus, or finesse, or it's a strength-based attack. And the player was really arguing, and not arguing in a nasty way, just like really trying to make their case that, I should be able to use ranged bonuses by using javelins. And so I sat back and I thought about it. Now, granted, before I go any further on this, I do not think that D&D is meant to be a 100% comprehensive physics simulator. Okay, on a certain level, it's a game. So you can have rules that don't necessarily make sense. But my initial response was like, well, you're throwing, so I can see it be more strength-based. Now, when you're archering, right, even though you're pulling the string back, it's the bow and the string that's doing the work once you release it. And even if you use a sling, it's really kind of centrifugal force that's doing a lot of the damage. Because if you throw a rock and bounce it off somebody, or if you put it in a sling and zing it, like you can really kill them with that because it's going to go faster than if you just throw it. So we kind of went back and forth, and at first I said, nah, I'm going to rule that it's strength. And then, around, because I don't like to just squash people. I try not to be that kind of DM. So when it came back around to that player again, I said, okay, let's talk about the Javelin thing again. I said, what's your thoughts? And they kind of told me, and I said, okay, well, here's the deal. Here's what I'm going to do. I said, if you want to make javelins so that they're ranged weapons and they use dex and your archery bonus and all that, that's fine. I said, but from this point forward in our group, javelins will be ranged based dex weapons. I said, anybody have a problem with that? And the Dragonborn's kind of like, well, I use javelins and I'm strength based, and I have a dex penalty, but I have a strength bonus, and javelin's one of my main weapons, and da da da. So I left it up to the group. I left it up to the player who was originally asking, can I use archery with my javelins, da da da. So I left it up to the group. I said, that's the compromise I'll put on the table. It can't be dex based for this person and strength based for this person. It's one or the other. And so they finally, I think because the Dragonborn, javelins is one of their main weapons. And for this other character, the bow and arrow is one of their main weapons. They just wanted to use javelins for whatever reason in this instance. So they ended up leaving it as it was, as a melee strength. And I said, fair enough. And everyone was like, yeah. And I still kind of felt like the player, was like, yeah, and but I think that was the fairest thing I could do. Because I could have just said no. But I was like, well, let's look, see if we can come up with a compromise here. So what are your thoughts out there? Now, personally, I think it makes sense for, if they would have said in 5th edition that javelins are ranged weapons that can use dex and this and that and the other. But since it's already in the book as a melee weapon, what are your thoughts? What should it be? And was that a good compromise to say, well, we'll make it a dex-based weapon, a ranged weapon, but then that's how it's got to be from this point forward. So love to have your thoughts on that. After that, they beat the gelatinous cubes. They did a little, things kind of somewhat went back to normal. We had a little fun with the guard who kept getting absorbed. He's like, huh. By the second time he gets absorbed, he's like, he's like, big cube, big cube. He's kind of like, deer in the headlights, been acid twice. So we had some fun with that. And then, but because the pudding and ooze attacks are becoming more and more common in Blingdenstone, it didn't take very long for things to pretty much go back to normal. And so they did some shopping, and I said anything that's in the player's handbook as standard normal adventurers equipment, you can find. Now it may have sort of an Underdark style to it, but you can find it. And I said, and also they do trade with the surface world, so it's a marketplace. You can find whatever you want down here if it's standard adventuring equipment in the player's handbook. And I told somebody later who was looking for, they keep looking for a book in Infernal because they want to learn the Infernal language. I said, if it's exotic, you can always we'll roll to see if you can find that. You can see if you have a chance of finding that. So if they want to do that, I'll assign a percentage chance, and we'll go from there. And then they've got like 3 days because they're having silvered weapons custom made at the Clattering Caves, which is the weaponsmiths, and they have 3 days to kill while they're waiting on that. And so they're like, what do we do? Because they want the silvered weapons before they go mess with the were-rats, right? Which is the main thing that the chiefs, the male and female chiefs of Blingdenstone have asked them to look at, the were-rat problem, as it were, and they have to figure out, do we recommend they attack and kill them, or do they try to negotiate with them and bring them into the fold and all that stuff, which will happen in future sessions. But I wanted to steer them towards, without putting them on rails, I was hoping they'd go towards the rock blight for a couple of days. And it just naturally happened. They were talking about the earth elementals, and they had heard rumors that sometimes the earth elementals are going bad, going crazy. And one of the players mentioned maybe we could learn a little bit more about that. And I said one of the things you've heard, at the marketplace as you're shopping during the day is that they keep earth elementals away from the rock blight, which is an area in Blingdenstone that people try not to go into because that's where earth elementals tend to go crazy in the rock blight. So I think they've pretty much decided that starting next session, they're going to go check out the rock blight. So we'll see. Anyway, that was this session. Had a lot of fun with it. Still enjoying this adventure. Love playing with my group. Love DMing all of it and everything. Love your comments. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the video. I really love to get your questions and comments. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. A lot of cool content. I try to put out my radio show, my podcast. There's a podcast extra I did recently that has the full interview with Russ Morrissey of Ian World about his What's Old is New Wine role-playing game. I do Let's Play videos, I do comic book reviews, I do this stuff. So hope you subscribe to the channel. Make sure to leave this video a thumbs up. That helps me out a lot. Thanks for watching, and we will catch you next time on Chain Plays.